Thank you so much for having me here today. I am a North Carolina native and grew up here, and I think the first picture my parents have of me is as a baby at the Azalea Festival. I'm not showing it, so don't ask. I didn't even bring it. My mother tried to get me to bring it, but I wouldn't do it. And then continuing on, so many summers my family spent here, and then through high school, spring breaks, and college, my friends came to UNCW, and we always knew on the weekend if we had a choice between staying in Raleigh and going to Wilmington. Guess where we chose? It was here. So no matter where I go, and I do go to a lot of places now, coming here always feels like a little bit of coming back home to me, because this place holds so many memories for me that makes this kind of conversation I'm going to have with y'all today so easy for me to have. I wanted to start out, though, today by asking you a question. When people come to visit you here, what do you show off about this place? Do you show them the natural beauty that's all around here? Or do you take them to the created beauty, the landmarks, the sacred places that are so very important and revered in this place? Or do you take them to something that you're pretty sure they don't have where they come from, such as a little roller derby on a Wednesday night? And then do you take them downtown for a drink and a good view? Or do you brag about the talent you're creating here? Explain to them why their children always want to end up coming to school here. Or do you brag about the people, the spirit, the neighborliness that is just felt when you're here, that is just as much a part of the place as any structure I could show you? Or maybe you take them out on experiences that you could really only have here. Maybe you look for opportunities to combine all the best that there is about this place to create for them a truly, uniquely Wilmington experience. The reason why I wanted you to go there in your mind is because what you show off about your place is what makes you love it here. And when you're talking about placemaking and where do we start and what is this thing, the first place to go into your mind is what is the thing that makes me love it here? Because placemaking, and here is probably the simplest definition I'm going to give all day and that you've heard from Wikipedia or anybody else, and it is the creation of loved places in a community. Placemaking has become a worldwide phenomenon. There are people talking about this work and doing this work all around the world, and no two projects ever look alike because no two places are ever alike. So let me explain a little bit about how we got to this moment. We have what's happening right now, what I would call a place renaissance, where we see people reprioritizing place, reprioritizing quality of life. People are no longer living to work, they're working to live. And I think one of the things that happened when the economy fell out, and I was doing Soul of the Community research around that time, 2008, 2010, one of the things I think that happened to us as a country is that we realized that maybe we had gotten a little off balance, that the job that we had given our life's blood to all of a sudden wasn't there for us when we needed it. And maybe we should be focusing a little bit more about the quality of life we have and also the ability to support it through a job, and that the job should be serving the life. We shouldn't be trying to serve the job. And what I discovered is no matter what scale of job you have, that reality stays the same. People are always looking to create the best lives they can for themselves and their families. Now, does that mean jobs don't matter? Well, of course not. Nobody is going to tell you that. That would be ridiculous. But it does mean that place has started earning a place at the economic development table. It doesn't replace other conversations. It just simply says we also need to be paying attention to this as well. This was most exemplified by this demographic, who in recent years have proven to be the first generation the first generation that will choose a place over a job. Now, if you think about how economic development has been done in this country historically, it has been where the job is the center of everything. And people will go where the job is. And that, to some extent, is still the case. But when you look at the 18 to 34 demographic, and this is across the board, regardless of education status, you see them talking more about wanting to live in certain places. And going so far as saying, I'll move there and figure out the job when I get there. And I usually have the parent support group for parents whose children have said that to him somewhere in the auditorium where I speak, because you see the look on their face where they, thank God I can say that that happened to me. It's happening a lot where kids are actually having that conversation. 60% or more are putting the place above the job. So if you're talking about specifically the highly recruited talent who might get job offers in more than one place, then the decision becomes exclusively about the place. So attraction and retention of talent is a conversation we're having at a place level because place has become a variable in their choice in such a big way. We are also seeing in the private sector, in the business sector, in the corporate sector, and it doesn't matter the size of the business or the industry. Businesses for a while now have been telling the story of trying to get people to take jobs in certain places and recruiting people using the old guidebook for recruitment. This is your position, this is your salary, these are your benefits, this is what we offer you. And to have, as one CEO put it to me, have all my paperwork shoved right back across the table to me and asked, tell me about that place I have to live. Tell me about the place. And as he said to me, you know, I work really hard at being able to sell positions. Now I have to sell places? I want to be in places that sell themselves. I want them to add to my equation in being able to attract and retain the best talent. We're also seeing the role of place in job performance. One of the discoveries in Soul of the Community, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, was that people who have high levels of attachment to where they live, really love where they live, have higher levels of job satisfaction as well. And when their attachment or their love of where they're living, their city, goes down, their job satisfaction goes down. And job satisfaction, of course, is tied to employee performance, which of course is tied to the bottom line of companies. So we started seeing a lot of the business community looking to this model because they understood that there is a factor. It's not the whole game, but it's a factor that nobody had been paying attention to until recently, which is the role of the place and how the worker shows up for the job, how they perform in the job, and how that in fact helps or hurts the bottom line of the company. So the business sector was considering this even more in their work. Now around this time that these environmental factors were happening, you know, you had this young talent, you had this focus on place, people talking about quality of life, what does that mean? The corporate community talking about their struggle in attraction and retention of talent in certain places. The Knight Foundation, which is a foundation in Miami, Florida, a national foundation, wanted to ask two very simple yet profound questions about place. Now this is a place-based foundation, which means that they fund 26 communities come hell or high water. Both have come to those 26 places too. So they've stuck with them all this time. And they believe in the idea of place mattering, but they had no proof. So they really wanted to ask these two simple questions about place. What makes people love where they live? And does it really matter? The first thing that we wanted to understand was this idea of place attachment, which is the thing that you see here in the circle. Now, this isn't about asking people, are you attached to living here? Because nobody would know how to answer that question. Instead, what we asked them about was about various aspects of their feelings about the place. So, are you optimistic about the community's future outlook? Are you satisfied living here? Is it the perfect place for you? not the perfect place, but the perfect place for you. Do you fit here? Would you recommend it as a place to live? And do you have a level of pride and enjoyment in being here? Now, there's a couple of things I want you all to understand about the multidimensional nature of attachment. Number one, it's not just about satisfaction. Because you know what we discovered about satisfaction? Satisfaction does not predict whether you'll pack your bags and leave tomorrow. Attachment does. Attachment does. I was in Newfoundland, and a man raised his hand, and he said, I understand what you mean about satisfaction versus attachment. I said, great, because I'm having a hard time explaining it. And he said, well, this is how I understand it to mean. My wife and I have lived in a lot of places, and he told this whole story of how he ended up in Newfoundland, of all places. And he said, and one day, over breakfast, she put the paper down, and she goes, you know, I've been fine living in a lot of places that we've lived in. This is the first place I never want to leave. And that is the difference between satisfaction and attachment. So we wanted to understand, can you measure a person's relationship with their place this way? And even if we could, now the social scientists in the room like me would have been delighted with just that. But if you wanted to make the research actionable, you had to figure out, what about a place drives these feelings? Because it's not good enough to go into a place and say, well, you guys just need to work on your pride, and things might, go better. That's not helpful to anybody. So what we tried to do is understand, well, what are the things about a place that drive those feelings? And if we can understand the things about a place that drive those feelings, maybe we have more better, my mother would be delighted, intervention points for dealing and affecting these feelings. So we measured a lot of things about the place, 10 things. And what I want you to see is that we divided them between resident offerings and social offerings. Resident offerings and place offerings. And the reason why we do that is something that I talk to leadership about all the time. There are the things that the place provides the resident. So those are like your basic services, your leadership, your education systems, feelings of safety, social infrastructure, aesthetics, the local economy. That's what the place kind of hands up to the resident. But the resident is part of the equation as well. The resident provides the feelings you get when you're in that place. The openness, the social capital, how likely are they to engage in the community? Those things you can't build, you can't fund, but your resident creates. And together you get a picture of place. So it is the infrastructure added with the resident that provides a place. And a lot of times we focus almost exclusively on the place offerings and not always about this other dynamic. So we wanted to capture both. And then, because we all know everybody's going to say, oh, Lord, touchy-feely, here we go. This is just another one of those things. We wanted to figure out a so what. So if we can measure this idea of being in love with where you live, and we can figure out what are the things about a place that drive those feelings, does it matter? Is it good for anything? Does it create capital for the place that anybody will care about, frankly? And we looked at a lot of things, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about what we found. But the thing that we ended up talking about the most, because this research happened between 2008 and 2010, was the relationship to local economic vitality, local GDP growth. This isn't about local GDP, rich people feeling happy about living in good places. This is about the vitality, the economic vitality of a place. And when you're talking about rebuilding economies, that's what everybody focuses on, is the growth of the place, the local GDP growth. And so this is what we found, and I'm going to read this because I know it's hard to see. We found, of the 10 things that we studied about the place, social offerings, aesthetics, and openness mattered most to driving those feelings of place attachment, being in love with where you live. And the higher levels of residents who have those feelings of attachment to place, the higher the local economic growth of those places. So down here, it says 2008, 2009, 2010, 26 communities, 3 years, 43,000 people. And it did not matter if the place in question was Detroit, Miami, Macon, Charlotte, Philadelphia, San Jose, Wichita, Milledgeville, Georgia, Tallahassee. These things always rose to the top of most driving those feelings of attachment to a place. Now, the other thing we saw about attachment, and this is kind of a new idea. I mean, if you think about the way the resident feels about their place, and we call that attachment. In the press, you hear it talked a lot about love of place. It's basically the same ideas. But what we found is if you can change public opinion of these things, you see same-year differences in attachment. And I have this background in social science, and I did a lot of work in social capital and civic engagement, and so I love those ideas, but you gotta work really hard in a really long time to build that stuff and just hope nothing little comes to knock the whole thing down. Attachment seems to work a bit differently. Attachment is much more nimble. It is much more easily impacted than some of those other things. The other thing that we realized after the Main Soul project was over in 2010 was that attachment is, we're just now understanding what all the things attachment is good for. And I can look at your faces and see your minds clicking around, I wonder if it matters for that, I wonder if it matters for that. So I'll give you a list of some of the things that we've already started looking into about what else does place attachment matter for. It seems to have an impact on school dropout. It seems to have an impact on public health seeking behaviors. You know, people's willingness to go and get services, especially in older populations. It seems to create for places a sense of resiliency where bad things just can't grow as easy. And that's the best way I know to describe it. It seems to provide a protective layer, if you will, around bad things happening, or the opposite, communities' ability to address and identify their own problems effectively. It seems to matter for the capacity of places, for keeping bad things from growing, dealing effectively with them when they do, as well as these traditional things that we always measure places by, their economic growth, their school dropout, all of those things. And probably around the country right now, I probably have 10 to 12 doctoral students who are still looking into this idea and finding things every single day that is contributing to this knowledge. So this is not like a lot of other areas where we kind of know all the best practices. We know all there is to know. We're still building this plane as we're flying it, which is very exciting and a bit terrifying if you can imagine building a plane as you're flying it. But the other thing that I wanted to say is that since I did this big soul project with all of these people, I also went into specific neighborhoods and I drilled down. I went into lower socioeconomic neighborhoods because one of the criticisms of soul is when you take a regional look at a place, you lose some variation. You wash out some of the stuff. So I went down into 2 zip codes in Charlotte. And we were in the Northwest Corridor, which was one of the projects mentioned. And we did the same thing again. Because one of the questions was, if you drill down to a neighborhood, is it still the same? If you're in a traditionally viewed disadvantaged, economically disadvantaged neighborhood, are they the same? And guess what? They are. So what does that mean? Well, it means that regardless of your economic scale, we all want to have dignity of place. We all want to have, as humans, opportunities to have positive social interactions with each other in a place that we can look around and feel proud of, where everybody accepts us for who we are. That does not have an income level. It also doesn't have a geographical basis. The smallest area to the largest area, it is the same. In that sense, place becomes the great equalizer in conversations. Because we might disagree about the problems and how to solve the problems, and we might disagree about economics and have different personal histories that we bring to the table. But what place can do is provide that common ground basis from which we can all start to have a different kind of conversation. So let me go through, I don't know if you can see, this is two people passing along y'all's waterfront with dogs. Something's getting ready to happen here. And this is where I'm going to talk about social offerings. And I'll explain this picture in just a second. Consistently, the number one thing that most drives people's feelings of attachment to a place are the opportunities for positive social interaction in a community. It attaches people to each other and to the place that provided that opportunity. So I show this picture on purpose because what often happens around social offerings is we think about the usual suspects of social infrastructure. How much do we provide things to do? And that's part of that, but I think you guys got that kind of covered. You guys do pretty well, especially in comparative to some of the other places I work in. You get the social infrastructure piece. You are surrounded by natural geography that lends itself, and you have river waterfronts, which always helps, and you've started down that path already. But then there's also the unusual suspects in a place that create opportunities for social interaction. And those are the impromptu things. So you have to be mindful of the formal infrastructure, social things, things to do, and the informal, the civility, the positivity, how people feel within those spaces. Because you know what we learned? If you provide social opportunities out the wazoo, and when people get in those structures, they're miserable, it degrades their perception of the social opportunity. You can't just build infrastructure without caring about what happens once people get in that infrastructure. So this is a story we don't know the answer to yet. This is an informal social interaction in the town of Wilmington getting ready to happen. What happened next? Did the dogs kill each other? No, I don't know. They're on the people's court tomorrow? I don't know. I doubt it, though. I tend to think as a North Carolinian that's not what happened. But I'll tell you something else we know about these critters. Neighborhoods that have higher levels of pet ownership, y'all know the statistics, have less crime. Why? Because they have angry dogs? No. Didn't matter the kind of dog. Because people who are pet owners are more likely to have boots on the streets in their neighborhood walking their dog more regularly. And so these kinds of informal interactions happen more often. And when you have informal social opportunities on the grounds in neighborhoods, crime and other things cannot grow as easily there. Because there's people out, but there's also a sense of attachment to each other that binds us to the place. Openness. In general, right behind social offerings is these feelings that everyone feels comfortable in their own skin in a place, that they feel accepted and feel like they can make a place for themselves there. This includes not only certain demographics and how we studied it, because we did look at certain different demographics, but we also looked at people in different stages of their lives. Because what we all know as people is what we needed when we were 20 is a little bit different than when we were 30, than when we were 40, 50, 60, on and on and on. Life stages create different needs for people. And so when we looked at openness, we looked at probably a 10-item scale that not only asked people about not just the historically disenfranchised groups that we have excluded from community conversations that need to be a part of them, but also young talent, families with young children, singles, seniors, as well as racial and ethnic minorities, immigrants, gays and lesbians. We looked at it all because what we discovered about a place by doing so, the goal cannot be welcomeness to some. The goal has to be welcomeness to all. And we cannot think that we are over-serving one without forgetting about the rest. It has to be a feeling that if you want to come here and make your life here and contribute to here, you have a place here, and you will be welcomed for it. So the not welcomeness to some, but welcomeness to all, because that means it's more than tolerance. And those who have heard me talk before say, and I always say it because it's so important, tolerance means I put up with you. And I do it through gritted teeth, and you're lucky I'm doing it. Welcomeness means please come. Make a place for yourself here. It's a higher level of expectation, and that's why a lot of the communities we studied struggle with this, because it's a higher level, there's no question. So lastly, aesthetics. This was the number 3 driver. Of all the 10 things that I told y'all at the beginning, this was number 3. And aesthetics for us and how we studied it was the natural beauty and how you develop the rest of it. Both of those things. And this really, I've never seen happier Parks and Rec people in my life than after Soul came out in the 3rd year when we had the same findings year after year after year. Because they had always been kind of saying, I'm telling you people, this matters. Everybody's like, okay, yeah, I know. You'll only know you love it when you miss it, those kinds of conversations. And in fact, there's a point to that. Because when local economies get tough, there's a lot of competing demands on leadership around budgets. Totally understandable. But what I think happened in a lot of places before Soul came out was they sort of redlined the green and the park and all of that, not really thinking it was going to take a hit on the place. Kind of did it, hated to have to do it, but didn't really think there was going to be a major consequence. And what Soul kind of told us is that it is part of the ingredient of a good place. And when you lose it, you've taken a bit of the pride and the enjoyment and the identity that people have for that place. Doesn't mean that, you can do it, you don't have to do it anymore, and you have to save aesthetics at any cost, but it says be more thoughtful in your choice when you're talking about this, because it plays a bigger part than maybe we thought. It is the difference. After, when Soul came out and I started talking to places about this idea in particular, I'd heard a lot of people say, this is the difference between me choosing to stay here and going somewhere else on vacation. This is the difference between me inviting family to come stay and visit me here versus me wanting to go visit them. This is the thing that is the source of pride and enjoyment and loyalty, consumer loyalty to a place. So, now that you know some of the key areas for placemaking and why they matter, you know just enough to be very dangerous. Because when Soul came out, a lot of people just started, social offerings, aesthetics, and openness. And we learned some things after Soul came out that I wanted to make sure and share with you. It's actually a top 10 list, but we're going to start with 6 and see how we do. These are some tips and some guidelines to help you avoid some of the potholes that some of other places really ran into shortly after implementing Soul in their community. Number 6 is when you're doing place-based efforts, you need to have a mix of quick start ideas and longer-term ideas. You can't just do little things all the time without thinking a little bit more about the longer-term vision and strategy that you have for that place. Meanwhile, you can't get people all stirred up about stuff and say, well, in 10 years we'll have something to show you. You wait and see. People die on the vine for that. It's not going to work. So you have to give them a sense of what's happening, first of all, so you don't freak everybody out. And you can start down a small, easy to grow, cheap, easy to implement, easily sustainable, quickie idea to get started. And that gets people, interesting, while you're maybe working on some longer term ideas. It has to be a mix of both. Be strength-based. If placemaking does nothing for you, it should command you to know what you're getting right as a place, because what placemaking would tell you to do is optimize what you're getting right. Start with your strengths. It is a much more mobilizing place to get communities to move forward if you're not again telling them chapter and verse of everything they're getting wrong as the way to start the conversation. It doesn't work. And I've worked in a lot of cities that no one has been able to tell them anything they're getting right for years and years and years. When you walk in with a placemaking model and I could show them their data and say, these are the areas that you're doing better at. This is going well. How can we mobilize your strengths to get to the things that you're not getting as right? That is a place where you get community engagement, you get mobilization, you get people engaged. Not, here comes somebody else, like this one, even if she is from North Carolina. You have to be strength-based, and what placemaking should focus you on is what are the things about this place that make us who we are that we've gotten right so far, and how can we build on that, and how can we optimize that, and how can we leverage that to get at what we're not getting as right. Get into a cycle of inspiring and delivering on optimism. You know, when I started this, I showed you in the circle outlook as one of the things that matters for attachment. You know, in that circle of satisfaction, outlook, you know, recommend, all that stuff. Outlook. What we found in the Soul Project is that people who think their community will be better tomorrow are more attached to it today. Higher levels of optimism in a place correspond to higher levels of attachment to that place. But here's the trick. You can't just keep, you know, being the Pied Piper in a place without finding ways to deliver on that optimism, because optimism is a lot like social capital. When you build it, you better take advantage of it, and you better deliver on it. So when I work with municipality leaders, we spend a lot of time just talking about how do you talk about the future of a place in a way that is meaningful to people. And what people don't care anything about is how busy you are with your 12,000 task forces. What they care about is how will this place be better tomorrow by the work that you're doing today. So I can figure out if I'm on this train or I'm not on this train. It's very, very simple. And when you create optimism and you realize that optimism, people are more likely to believe you the next time you come forward. If you've said one thing and it didn't happen, and then the next time they're like, you know, I'm not falling for this again, leads to resident apathy, leads to disengagement, a whole path, a logic model that I can go into that's very depressing, and I'm strength-based, so I'm not going to do it. So you have to get, and that's why that mix of short-term ideas and long-term projects is so important, because that gets you in the habit of starting this thing off right. Recognize that your number one customer for your tourism is your residents. I work with a lot of tourist communities, and they are at a particular risk when it comes to placemaking of selling out their place and thinking that they have to turn themselves into something else so that they can attract and get that visitor dollar. If your residents can't look at your own tourism campaign and see themselves in it, you're already down the slope. And tourists, we know this from marketing, tourists want place experiences now. It's a bit different than it used to be. If you look on any travel site, you can see about, you know, I rated my hotel this way, that way. Then they rate the place. The experience of being in that place. The place is rated as well as the hotel. The place gets more space than the hotel oftentimes because the market has shifted. People are looking for a place experience in their place. And if they're coming here, that means they want the place experience that they think you could provide them. So don't do bait and switch. Don't be not that. Be exactly that. That's what they have bought into. So you have to believe that you're good enough as you are. And this is where we get, touchy-feely again, get in touch with our feelings. You have to believe that you're good enough as a place, as who you are, enough to optimize it. Let's make it the best we can make it. This is who we are. Let's make it the best we can make it. And find a way to promote it in such a way that we don't even lose our own people in the process. Wikipedia got one thing right. It is a philosophy and not just a project. It is a framework for understanding why we're doing stuff and a framework for understanding what to do. Because why is philosophical. What without the why, people don't understand the grounding behind it. So you have to be able to have a philosophy as well as a project. But it's not just a project. I don't want to see people say, come here in the car, here's our placemaking project. There it is right there. Okay, now to the rest. Because placemaking, when you do it right, should be integrated into every decision you make as a place. What is the place impact of this? How will it affect those softer sides of place that people tend to think about? What will this do to our narrative as a place? What can I imagine will happen to resident attachment as a result of this choice? It is a lens through which you view the world, frankly, when it comes to your place. That's why people are sometimes shocked to hear about cities where the transportation sector is the champion of placemaking. How did that happen? Well, because all groups should be able to look through the lens of their discipline and see how this applies to their work today. And transportation folks that said, well, we have an impact on aesthetics. We have the bikes, we have the walkability, we have the traffic lanes. We are the way people connect into these targets, to the social offerings, to the aesthetics. The openness, you want to talk about road rage and all of that stuff that goes along with civility of a place? They have seen their connection. So by looking through whatever desk you sit at tomorrow, what does this mean for you? It has to be integrated into a philosophy more than a project. And number one, please, if you don't hear anything else I say today, you have to know your place and be authentic to it. Placemaking, the pothole of placemaking is it becomes gimmicky, Disney World, bungee cords every 5 feet, stuff like that don't resonate and feel rooted to this particular place. Why is that here? What is it about this place that makes this make sense for this place? You can't copy off another city's paper. You can't. What did they do? That worked, we'll do that. That'll work here. It didn't work here. Yeah, no kidding. These places are radically different. You have to be inspired by other places, but you have to adapt. You can't adopt. You have to adapt. What other places have done, maybe, and bring it here. And even then, my stomach hurts about it. So it should really compel you to be who you are, but the best who you are that you can be. And to do that, again, you have to believe that who you are as a place is good enough. This also is what keeps you from losing your residents by the wayside while you do this. One of the saddest statistics in Soul of the Community for me was looking at residential tenure, which is how long people have lived in a place and their attachment levels. And in some places, you see, and there are a couple of places in particular, and they end up being in the South, which really breaks my heart even more, where people showed up with the highest attachment level, and the longer they stayed, the worse it got. And when you talk to those people, they will talk about, this is not this is changing into a place that I don't recognize. Older residents, people who have lived there a long time, say the same thing too. So what we learned about residential attachment with tenure is you have like 3 to 5 years with new residents to attach them into the narrative that you want them to be a part of. With your longer term residents, you have to maintain some level of the culture, the history, the geography, the industry, the anchor institutions, the landmarks. You have to know what it is about your place so that you can base what you're doing off of that. It should be harnessing those things, not leaving them in the dust. That's how people still recognize the place that they're in as the place that they love as you go through this process. So here's a very, not going to make it on a cocktail napkin kind of model to show you really this is the big picture here. Knowing who you are as a place narrative, place identity, but it is multidimensional. It's more than a tagline, it's more than a superficial thing that could apply to any place. It is the thing about this place that gives you the competitive advantage. The resources, the culture, the history, the landmarks, all that thing, the geography. Knowing who that is and what that is for you, and highlighting it through those softer sides of place, the social offerings, the aesthetics, the uniquely Southern charm that is openness and welcomeness in the South, usually. That is placemaking. Knowing who you are and demonstrating it through those three things. And by doing that thing called placemaking, we grow this thing called residential attachment, love of place. And we want to do that because we're just learning that it has outcomes not only for the place, but for the individuals that live in it. Loved places do better. So I'm going to end today with a story from my daughter Grace, because Grace taught me everything I know about placemaking. She's 7. And this is a picture of over the Rockies, flying. She was with me. She was probably 5 at the time. And she's sitting in the window seat, because the 5-year-old gets the window seat always. We were flying to California for something I had to do, and she said, "Mommy, how did the mountains get made, and the rivers? She was looking down, how does that happen?" And I gave her the North Carolina public education answer to that question, which was about plate movement and tectonics and all that stuff, and erosion with water. And I did it for a 5-year-old, but I went the correct way. And she's looking at me with that face, and I'm like, "So that's it?" And she goes, "Mommy, you got to be making that up. That can't be how it's done." And I said, "Well, how do you think it's done? You tell me." And she says, "Well, I think," and she pointed to some of these are like little communities and things that are along the river here and at the base of the mountain that you can't see. She goes, "I think those people that lived in those places for generations had decided, we should have a river here. And we should build a mountain here." So they got buckets and they dumped water, for a while, and they made mountains like I do at the beach with my sand bucket. And just over time, everybody contributed to making that place over time. And eventually, they got their place, but they just made it the best they could think of. Still felt like home to them, but they optimized it. She didn't say optimized it. She said that made it happier. And it took a long time, and sometimes they failed, but you had to keep at it. And that's how we got to have places. And I thought, well, that might be one of the best definitions of placemaking I've ever heard. Because it is a group effort. It takes short-term and long-term goals. And it is about keeping the place you have, but making it happier, making it the best place you can make it to be. So that with an optimized place, you still recognize your place on the other side of it. And I promise you'll still love to call it home. Thank you so much for having me today. I appreciate it.